Analytics are great, but don't let them be the foundation on which you play fantasy football. They're best utilized as a peripheral tool only.
Tyler Boyd's dip in production last year better correlates with Andy Dalton being off the field than it does with A.J. Green being off the field, despite public perception.
You can't watch just highlight film because highlight film only shows the good things. Watch the player's actual game tape because you see the good and the bad.
In 7 games in 2018, where all 3 starting Rams receivers were healthy, Brandon Cooks led the trio in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and total PPR points by a considerable margin.
We are back with the 2020 RotoBros NFL Draft Scouting Brief Series. We've got a couple more prospects to do here. We have the NFL Draft coming up this coming weekend. Just a few more days until that happens. Obviously, there's no sports, so we're all dying for this to take place, and we can't wait. Even though it's a virtual draft, I know we're all excited, and you guys are just as excited as I am. So this episode is going to be centered around Denzel Mims, the talented wide receiver out of Baylor. So let's jump right in here because there's a lot to know and a lot to understand about Denzel Mims. There's a lot of people have fallen in love with him after his Senior Bowl, after his combine. This was a guy that I'll kind of rewind it just for back to some previous dates for just a minute. Back in January, I was much higher on Denzel Mims. He was one of the top receivers that I was excited to really scout and analyze here. And so I'm sitting at the Senior Bowl. We're standing in the end zone, me and my buddy Jake, and we're watching as Jordan Love comes on and he takes the field. And I told him, I said, keep an eye out for Denzel Mims. Denzel Mims is the receiver you want to watch on this team. And sure enough, just 2 or 3 snaps in to Jordan Love's series, his first series at the Senior Bowl, he tried to chunk one all the way down the field to Denzel Mims. Now, unfortunately, Jordan Love has a rocket arm, and he unfortunately overthrew Denzel Mims, but Denzel had his man beat. Okay, and that's really the story with Denzel Mims, or at least part of it. He will beat you. He will get behind the defense. So he was wide open, and in man coverage, he'd beat the coverage, but unfortunately, Jordan Love just kind of slightly overthrew him there. But that would have gone for probably, I think it was like a 60, 70-yard touchdown. Had Jordan Love just taken a little bit off of that throw. But anyway, let's jump right into it here for Denzel Mims. He is 6'3", 207 pounds. So he's got excellent size. He's got the prototypical size that you'd look for a wide receiver that you want really to be your prototypical X wide receiver, maybe even a talented Z wide receiver in the NFL. But regardless, he's got the size that you look for out of an alpha wide receiver, out of a Batman wide receiver. Physically, again, he has everything you want in an alpha X receiver in the NFL. He's strong, he's physical, and he's blazing fast, and he's got a crazy catch radius. Okay, all of that sounds great, right? So on paper, you want him as your wide receiver 1, okay? But, and it's a big but, he's got a lot of work. He's got a lot to work on, and he's a very unrefined receiver at this point in his career. Okay, probably the biggest concern for Denzel that I have is the fact that he has a large history of drops, and he's really struggled in contested catch situations. His tape is littered with missed opportunities due to drops and being unable to really win those big one-on-one situations in regards to those drops. Again, in regards to those drops, Sports Info Solutions has him flagged for 24 drops over his final 3 seasons. Okay. Look, to me, drops for receivers matter. It just does. Okay. It matters. It's like ball security for running backs. It matters. Now, it's fixable like ball security for running backs, but it absolutely matters. And so that is a little bit of a red flag to me. The only silver lining here is that he did cut the drop count down from 11 as a junior to 5 as a senior. So that's a positive. And here's possibly another positive. He did reveal a couple weeks ago, he played through a broken hand for part of 2019. So keep that in mind here as well, because it tells you his toughness is not in question. And obviously, he cut the drop count down from 11 as a junior when his hand was fine to 5 with a broken hand. So you got to ask yourself, to be fair, you have to ask yourself, how many drops would he have still had 5 drops had he not been playing through a broken hand for part of the year? Probably not. So there is that you want to keep that in mind, but you also want to keep in mind as well on the flip side that he did have a broken hand, so that may have made it a little bit more difficult in a couple of circumstances. So again, his toughness is not in question. In regards to contested catches, however, this to me is probably the biggest red flag. With as many times as he fails in this area, especially against talented corners. Okay. However, I do feel it's only right if I praise him, succeeding in a crucial moment in this area against his best competition of the season, which was in the Sugar Bowl against UGA. If you turn on the UGA film at the 4:49 mark of the UGA film at about, I think it's like right around the 25-yard line. I can't remember the exact mark. I think it was like 25, 28-yard line. Denzel is lined up at the top of the screen in press coverage, okay? And look, he does an excellent job here to showcase his physicality and is able to bring the ball in and defeat the defender to make the catch for what was a corner touchdown, okay? He's sort of falling away. The defender's behind him. He boxes out the defender, and he's able to overpower that defender, who was a much smaller corner for UGA to secure that touchdown. So that was, you got to praise him for that. And he's got a couple of those. But the majority of the time on his film, you do see him struggle in contested catch situations, whether it's double coverage, whether it's, it's man coverage where he's got his man draped all over him. And the better the corner is, the tougher it seems to get for Denzel Mims. That, to me, is a problem. We'll kind of touch on that here in a minute. But again, his physicality is not in question, as we mentioned before. And look, the example I gave you, that's good Denzel, okay? Unfortunately, that's not, like I said, the Denzel that you will see very often in contested catch situations. Yak, yards after catch, is also not something you're likely to get out of Denzel Mims either. So don't be looking for that. He averaged only 3 yards after the catch as a senior. Okay. And that's sort of puzzling because he was playing in that Baylor offense, that wide open, spread out Baylor offense where you have a lot of softer coverage against these Big 12 defenses, right? It's not like you're playing against LSU and Alabama, okay, in Georgia in every single game, because you can go back and watch the Georgia film. They didn't give him as much room as Texas would, or Texas A&M or someone like that. Typical Big 12, or not Texas A&M anymore. They're not Big 12. They're SEC. But you see what I'm saying? Kansas State, Kansas, those Big 12 teams typically play that softer defensive coverage because nearly every team in the league is running a spread offense. So it's kind of, you would hope that Denzel Mims, especially with his speed and quickness, you would imagine that he would have more than 3 yards after the catch. So that's a little, peculiar. But regardless, it's not something that you can expect from Denzel Mims very often. He does have solid burst off the line. His speed is not in question. We mentioned that earlier. He can be a total burner downfield, and he has zero issues getting behind the defense. His footwork isn't horrible, okay, but it could improve. To me, from what I could tell, he's about average in this area for a receiver, coming into the NFL. So it's not what I would consider a red flag. It's just something, hey, by the way, you might want to work on this. It's nothing huge. It's nothing terrible. But yeah, he is going to want to, work on that and at least get a little bit better at that. Obviously, because he's going to be facing, more talented corners. So he's going to have to work on, that footwork to sort of be a little bit more deceptive as well. One thing he does very well at the line, though, and even all throughout the route when needed, I love how he uses his hands when fighting off defenders. He does this very well. Another thing he does very well is block. Okay, as he should, as you would expect him to. His size, strength, physicality, in his length, really, it allows him to, square up and become really an immovable object for defenders trying to get to the quarterback or, trying to get to the ball carrier. When you see this guy block, it's like he doesn't move. I mean, he is strong. I'll give it to him. He is strong. He is hard to move off his spot when he's blocking. So that's good. Obviously, that's not going to result in fantasy points for all you fantasy listeners, obviously. But regardless, it's definitely something that you want to kind of take into consideration when you're talking about the total overall package for Denzel Mims. I do love his body control on most catches, especially when he has to get up and snatch it. He's no CeeDee Lamb or Justin Jefferson in this area when it comes to body control, but he holds his own. And for a lot of receivers, this is another thing I like in this area about him. For a lot of receivers, okay, of his size and skill set, you'll find that many of them are stiff in this area. So it's kind of refreshing to see Denzel Mims not be as stiff in the body control area, right? He doesn't really have any real big issues here in this area of body control. So that's good. I've seen him make some very acrobatic sideline catches. And of course, his athleticism, and how his length and physicality, that's all part of that body control package. So he does a really good job, of kind of putting that all together in those jump ball situations and those acrobatic sideline catch situations as well. So I did like to see that on his film. He doesn't have a very diverse route tree whatsoever. Okay, we're going to call a spade what it is here. If you were somebody who was concerned about DK Metcalf last season, you should really be concerned about Denzel this year because Mims isn't even as good of a route runner as DK Metcalf was coming out of Ole Miss last year. And now I think that the route running for DK Metcalf last year was a little overblown. He wasn't great, okay, but I don't think he was nearly as bad as what a lot of people thought. He didn't have a wide, okay, route tree. He didn't have a big bag of tricks in his route tree. But what he did have in his bag, he did very well, okay? There wasn't very many of them, but he did very well. Denzel Mims doesn't do a whole lot of them very well, and he doesn't have a whole lot of them either. So he's really, again, we talked about he's an unrefined receiver. This is the biggest part of that. He's again, with the drops and the, contested catches and, against talented corners. But the route running, those three pinpoints right there are the biggest things for me. But look, that's what wide receiver coaches are for. Okay, this can be fixed for a wide receiver. That's why wide receiver coaches exist. I say it almost on every receiver running back scouting brief. That's why position coaches exist. That's why they get paid money. Okay, he can improve here just as DK Metcalf did. Though it should be noted that DK Metcalf's improvement in route running was very fast and very noticeable. Okay, it is not common for receivers like Mims to improve their route running that quickly, like DK did. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's possible he could, but as of right now, he does need a lot of seasoning, a lot of work, in this area. So taking all of this into account, his NFL comparison to me is blatantly obvious. Okay, it's Stephen Hill, former Georgia Tech wide receiver who was drafted by the Jets in the second round in 2012. They are virtually identical players. And before I want to preface this real quick. I am very familiar with Stephen Hill. I am a Georgia Tech fan. Okay, that is my college team. So I know all about Stephen Hill. I know all about the offense that we used to run when Stephen Hill was at Tech. Okay. That is my comp for Denzel Mims. They are virtually identical players. Though the only difference, I would say that Denzel is a little bit more physical than Stephen Hill was. Though Stephen Hill did not lack in physicality. There was a lot of blocking that went on in Georgia Tech because when you're running as often as you are in a triple option offense, your receivers have to block, especially the top two that are going to be on the field for nearly every snap. Okay, so you got to be able to block. So he was physical, not nearly to the extent that Denzel Mims is. So that's a feather in Denzel's hat in that area. But that's the only real difference to me. So just how similar are they? So let's jump into this. First of all, let's look at the film. Okay. They look identical on film. They run the same. They were both not very good route runners. Okay. They both struggled with drops. Both are excellent blockers, and they both struggled with contested catches against talented competition. So from a film standpoint, they're identical players. Okay. What about metrics and analytics? I'll even give you those. Mark is typically the metrics analytics guy, but I'm gonna share them with you here. Okay. What about the metrics and analytics? Let's dive into it. Stephen Hill, a 40 time of 4.36. That's 97th percentile 40 time. Denzel Mims, 4.38, 96th percentile. Speed score, Stephen Hill, 99th percentile. Denzel Mims speed score, 96th percentile. Burst score, Stephen Hill, 95th percentile. Birth score, Denzel Mims, 90th percentile. Catch radius, Stephen Hill, 95th percentile. Catch radius, Denzel Mims, 96th percentile. The breakout age that a lot of people look at, breakout age, 19 and under is typically the ideal breakout age for a college receiver. Stephen Hill and Denzel Mims share a breakout age of 19. College dominator, one of Mark's favorites. College dominator, Stephen Hill, 44.9 college dominator rating. College dominator ratings, Denzel Mims, 42.3. Okay. So they are identical on film. They're identical with their workout metrics, nearly identical with their workout metrics and analytics. They even wore the same number in college, number 5. They both wore number 5. So the similarities are endless with these two. Okay. Now, Stephen Hill had a higher yards per reception, but that was really mainly due to the fact that, again, he played in the old triple option offense for Georgia Tech. And this meant literally nothing but single man coverage on nearly every single snap when GT would throw the ball. When Tech was throwing the ball downfield for huge chunks, it was typically going to Stephen Hill. He was the number 1 receiver on that team. He was constantly playing against man coverage, and he just had to beat his man. And typically he was faster than his man. And GT didn't throw it. Georgia Tech didn't throw the ball very often. But when they did, it was down the field for huge chunks. And that's a reason why his yards per reception was so much higher than Denzel Mims. Okay, that's just how the Georgia Tech offense was built during the triple option era of Paul Johnson. But much like Stephen Hill, Denzel faced single man coverage on a majority of his snaps. Okay, I told you earlier, he was playing against Big 12 defenses, which we all know has the ability to inflate the numbers a bit and the talent of the Big 12 receivers many times because they're usually playing against, soft coverage defensive schemes. And what that does is that allows a lot more cushion for these spread offenses like what Baylor and many other Big 12 teams run. Okay. So look, I don't view Denzel as a receiver who is going to take over and be some unstoppable wide receiver 1 force for any football team. Okay. From what I've seen, he will struggle against top corners in the NFL and thus be limited in what he can offer. Okay, he's going to be a solid deep threat. He should be. Okay, and that's what Stephen Hill should have been. But I don't know if you're ever going to get that consistency that you want out of one of your out of your top receiver if he ends up being drafted as a wide receiver 1 on someone's team. I think he is better suited to be more of a decent number 2 receiver in the league. Kind of like, if he's put into a situation like what maybe like Julio was put in, he is nothing compared to Julio. They're not in any way remotely similar. I want to make sure that is clear. Julio was extremely refined coming out of Alabama, and he did not have hardly any weaknesses. Okay? That is not the case with Denzel Mims. All I am saying is that if he is put in a position, drafted into a situation similar to what Julio was drafted into. Julio did not come into the league and get drafted by the Falcons as the number one wide receiver. Okay. Roddy White was the number one guy for a couple seasons before Julio took over. So he was drafted to come in and be that number two guy, take some of the pressure off of Roddy White in his later seasons. If Denzel Mims can come into the league, okay, with a good coach, good offense, solid quarterback, and sort of play that second fiddle for a year or two while he learns the nuances of the position in the NFL, learns the playbook, becomes a more refined and seasoned route runner, wins more one-on-one situations, I think Denzel Mims can be a fine receiver in this league. Okay. Currently, I think he's currently on the first round, second round fence. I think he's going to be overdrafted in the NFL. I currently have him mocked in the first round of the 49ers. The 49ers only have, I think they have their 2 first round picks, and they don't pick again until the 5th round. So they could trade back up for another receiver and pass on, a guy like Mims in the first round. But if they don't do that and they don't pick again until the 5th round, I think you're going to see them take a receiver with one of their first 2 picks. I have them taking one with their second first round pick and taking Denzel Mims. It wouldn't be the most ideal spot, but he does have Deebo Samuel, on the other side of him, which I don't think Deebo is a Batman receiver either. He's more of a Robin. So it would be a difficult situation for him. Now, if he were to go to Green Bay, that's a totally different situation, because he will not be pressured for the next probably 4 years, to be that number one guy. Davante Adams is still young enough to where he would be that number one guy for several more years. Denzel would just be a solid number 2. That is the ideal spot, I think, in the entire NFL for Denzel Mims to land. So if he goes there, he'll have a solid coach, a solid system, a solid quarterback, and a solid situation. It will be ideal for him. There is not a better place for Denzel Mims to be drafted. There's not. Okay? So let's all hope for Denzel's fate in the NFL, for his career, and for fantasy purposes. The guy, we all want to draft him. We want a piece of him, at least. He will be a lot more attractive in a place like Green Bay than he would San Francisco. Okay? And he'd have a much better chance to succeed and have a better career than Stephen Hill did. But I do think he will be overvalued and overdrafted in fantasy, depending on where he goes. He goes to Green Bay, he should be a first-round pick. He should be a first-round pick in every draft. Allen Lazard is not going to hold Denzel Mims off. He's just not. Okay? Denzel Mims should start from day one across from Davante Adams, and he should be given every opportunity to succeed. And he's going to be playing with a quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, in a system, and for a coach that has obviously shown that they can succeed together. I think this would be an awesome place for Green Bay, and I really, really hope they grab him. And again, I think he can be a decent number 2 receiver in the league, but I really don't ever see him being a top flight alpha wide receiver 1 in this league. And really, to put it plainly, I think we see more of a Stephen Hill career. Maybe he doesn't fall out of the league like Stephen Hill did after several years, but I do think that we're going to see some consistency issues, some struggles that Stephen Hill saw adjusting to the league and to those new offensive concepts. I think we'll see more of a Stephen Hill sort of career. We'll be closer to that than we will be, let's say, a Kenny Golladay sort of career. So that's kind of where I'm at on Denzel Mims, guys. I like him, but I don't love him. He is probably, after watching all this film and sort of digesting everything about him, he is outside my top 10 right now. Okay, I have him as wide receiver 11, right behind T. Higgins at wide receiver 9, right behind Laviska Shenault at wide receiver 10. Okay, obviously, landing spot for him is going to matter a lot for a guy like Denzel. If he goes to Green Bay, he will vault way up into my top 10, and he'll move the needle quite a bit. So we'll see what happens there for dynasty rankings purposes and fantasy purposes. But right now, from a talent standpoint, from a film standpoint, from what I see from him, that's just where I have him slotted pre-draft. So anyway, guys, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. We will obviously have a couple more coming your way as well before draft weekend next weekend. So be on the lookout for that. Guys, thanks for listening. Have a great weekend. Hope everybody is staying safe. And as always, keep balling, baby.